I'm Ryan.
And I'm Tessa.
This is The Dark Dive, where we examine the stories that refuse to stay buried.
Every episode, we follow the evidence, confront the unknown, and bring clarity to the shadows.
No speculation, no sensationalism, just the truth, wherever it leads.
You're listening to The Dark Dive.
Imagine having 300 perfectly preserved puzzle pieces to solve a horrific crime.
Right.
These pieces are sealed, they're climate controlled, and they're just sitting in a secure evidence locker right now.
Waiting to be tested.
Exactly. Now, I want you to imagine a grieving mother. She's been waiting 40 years while the state repeatedly tells her that she isn't allowed to look at those pieces.
It's infuriating.
It is. They will not put the puzzle together, and they will not let anyone else do it either. That is the reality we are examining today.
Yeah.
We're going back to the summer of 1985, to Ovid, New York.
Which, if you aren't familiar, is a very small town.
Right. If you look at a map of the Finger Lakes region, Ovid is this tiny, geographically isolated community.
I mean, it's the kind of town where generations of families are woven together.
Yeah, the rural roads out there pitch black at night. And an outsider is noticed the second they cross the town line.
You don't just blend in.
Oh, you don't. And in August of that year, the quiet of this insular community was shattered by a brutal murder. The victim was a visitor, drawn to Ovid by a chance encounter, only to find herself trapped in a nightmare that, remains deliberately unresolved 4 decades later.
Her name was Kristen O'Connell. She was a 20-year-old college student from Burnsville, Minnesota.
So a long way from New York.
A very long way. And when you look through the primary sources, Ryan, and the accounts of the people who loved her, a very clear picture emerges of who she was.
Yeah, she seemed incredibly bright.
She was vibrant, deeply kind, and adventurous. I mean, she was studying, she was planning her future, doing exactly what you expect a 20-year-old to do, which is exploring her independence.
Right, finding herself.
Exactly. But that trajectory was violently cut short. And the premise of our deep dive today centers on a deeply unsettling institutional paralysis.
Because we aren't just talking about a cold case where they hit a dead end.
No. Over 1,900 leads have been generated since 1985. 1,900.
Wow.
Yet, despite massive pressure from the community and standing offers from advanced forensic laboratories worldwide to process the evidence for free, those 300 pieces of physical evidence remain locked away.
Entirely untested.
Entirely untested by modern standards.
So let's break down how Kristen ended up on a dark road in upstate New York.
Yeah.
We have to look back to the spring of 1985.
Right, a few months earlier.
She was vacationing on Captiva Island in Florida, which is this idyllic, sun-drenched setting.
It's gorgeous.
It is. And it's the kind of environment where people naturally let their guard down. I mean, the psychology of a vacation romance is very specific.
Oh, absolutely. You are removed from the stresses of your daily life. The people you meet are projecting the best, most relaxed versions of themselves.
Right. Everyone's on their best behavior. And while she was there, she met a young man, a guy from Ovid.
And they connected. When the trip ended, they stayed in touch via letters and phone calls.
Which is entirely normal.
It is, but we need to examine the massive psychological leap of faith required to take the next step, especially in that era. In August, Kristen made the decision to travel from her home in Minnesota to visit this man in New York.
Right, and you have to consider the inherent vulnerability of that action.
I mean, in 1985, there were no smartphones, Ryan.
No location sharing, no texting your friends to say you arrived safely.
Nothing. She was leaving her entire support system behind to travel to a deeply rural, unfamiliar environment. And she's moving into the home of someone she essentially only knew within the artificial vacuum of a tropical vacation.
Which is a huge risk, even if you don't realize it at the time. And the reality of that rural environment seemed to hit her almost immediately.
It did.
Because shortly after she arrived in Ovid, the narrative shifts drastically. Something fundamentally went wrong.
A massive behavioral shift.
Yeah. On August 14th, Kristen walked away from the trailer where she was staying, and she found a public payphone. She called her mother back in Minnesota.
And during that call, she stated unequivocally that she was cutting her trip short.
Right. She was booking a flight to come home the very next day. But crucially, she did not explain why.
She just said she was leaving.
Yeah. Now, Tessa, you don't just call your mother from a payphone to say, I'm coming home early, unless a switch flipped.
No, you don't.
To me, that screams she experienced something deeply alarming. And more importantly, by using a payphone, it means she specifically did not want the man she was staying with to overhear that conversation.
Your assessment is entirely aligned with behavioral threat analysis, Ryan. Finding a payphone in a rural town requires effort.
You have to walk down the road, find a gas station or a diner.
Right. It requires a deliberate physical departure from her host's residence to secure a private line of communication. You do not abandon a cross-country trip immediately upon arrival unless your baseline perception of safety has been completely shattered.
So something scared her.
It implies an acute, immediate discomfort. Whether it was a sudden interpersonal conflict, a frightening behavioral shift in the man she was visiting, or even just a realization about the isolation of the environment itself.
The isolation out there is intense.
It is. And her response was absolute flight. She didn't just want to leave the next day, she wanted out immediately. She was actively orchestrating her escape.
Which brings us to the events of that final night, and a timeline that is entirely dependent on the narrative provided by the very man she was visiting.
The only witness to her departure.
Right. According to his official statement to the police, Kristen left his trailer at 11:30 p.m.
Late at night.
Very late. His explanation was that she wanted to, quote, take a walk.
Which, I mean, it makes no sense.
No. If you are listening to this, you are probably screaming at your device right now.
Who takes a midnight stroll in a strange town they're actively trying to flee?
And you are right to be skeptical. Because according to this account, she walked out into the pitch-black countryside alone, and she left behind both her shoes and her purse.
It is a profound behavioral contradiction. Let's break down the physical reality of that scenario.
Okay.
Rural roads in Ovid in 1985 were unlit. They were rough. We're talking gravel, dirt, and uneven pavement.
Not somewhere you want to be barefoot.
Yeah. A 20-year-old woman who has already determined she feels unsafe in this environment does not voluntarily embark on a leisurely barefoot walk in the dark.
It defies logic.
Completely. Leaving personal items like a purse, which contain her money, her identification, and effectively her only means of leaving the state.
Right. Her ticket home.
Exactly. It indicates one of two forensic realities. Either she was forcefully removed from that trailer against her will, or she fled the trailer in such a state of absolute blinding panic that grabbing her shoes and ID was secondary to immediate physical survival.
So she was running for her life.
That's what the behavior suggests. The narrative of a voluntary walk simply doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
But despite the improbability of his story, we know she physically ended up on that road.
Because of the witnesses.
Right. Witness sightings confirmed it. Later that night, witnesses reported seeing a stopped vehicle near Kristen on the road.
And she wasn't just walking past it?
No. Even more concerning, she was seen actively talking to someone inside that vehicle.
Which adds a whole new layer of complexity.
And shortly after that sighting, another report placed two unidentified men walking on the road behind her.
And the failure to identify those individuals is staggering to me.
In a town that small.
Yes. In a town of a few hundred people, a specific vehicle and two men walking on foot late at night do not simply vanish. Yet, none of the people involved in those sightings have ever been formally identified by law enforcement.
It's unbelievable. And then we hit the agonizing delay that really defines the investigative failures of this case.
The timeline gap.
Yeah. After Kristen allegedly walked out of the trailer at 11:30 p.m. barefoot, she did not return. But the man she was visiting did not immediately call the authorities.
He waited.
He waited until the following morning to report her missing. That is a 13-hour gap.
13 hours in a criminal investigation is an absolute eternity.
A lot can happen.
A massive amount can happen. We have to look at what physically takes place during a delay of that magnitude. First, from an operational standpoint, it provides the perpetrator with a massive window.
Time to cover their tracks.
Exactly. They have time to clean a crime scene, incinerate clothing, dispose of the murder weapon in a secondary location, coordinate alibis with accomplices.
They have the entire night.
They do. But chemically and biologically, the delay is catastrophic. Overnight, dew sets in. Temperatures fluctuate.
And what does that do to the evidence?
When biological evidence like blood, sweat, or skin cells is exposed to overnight environmental moisture, the cellular walls literally begin to burst.
Wow.
Bacteria multiply rapidly in the damp environment, and that degrades the specific genetic markers that forensic labs rely on to build a profile. By the time law enforcement was finally notified the next morning, that crucial window for pristine evidence collection was already closing.
That 13-hour delay allowed crucial physical evidence to be degraded by the elements, which leads directly into the grim discovery and the forensic anomalies we must now examine. Tessa, it is time we transition into the dark dive. We have to look at the physical realities of the crime scene.
I agree, Ryan. Let's look at the evidence.
The search for Kristen did not last long. On August 16th, 2 days after her phone call to her mother from that payphone, a team of local volunteer firemen made a horrific discovery.
They found her.
Yeah. Kristen's body was located in a cornfield. She was less than a quarter of a mile from the trailer where she'd been staying.
Just a quarter of a mile.
So close.
And the state of the crime scene tells a very specific, intensely violent story. When she was discovered, she was naked.
Completely undressed.
Yes. She was heavily rain-soaked due to the weather that moved in during that 13-hour reporting delay, which severely compromised the recovery of trace evidence on her skin.
Right, washing away potential DNA.
Exactly. And the injuries were devastating. She had suffered multiple severe stab wounds, and her throat had been slashed.
It's just a brutal level of violence. And when we look at the autopsy reports, the anomalies, the things that were absent from the findings, they challenge almost every official assumption about this crime.
The negative space in the autopsy is crucial here.
Yeah. First, the toxicology report showed absolutely no alcohol or drugs in her system.
None.
Which definitively eliminates any theory that she was impaired, disoriented, or voluntarily wandered into the field in an intoxicated state.
She was fully aware.
Fully aware. Second, despite being found entirely naked, the medical examiner found absolutely zero evidence of sexual assault.
Which changes the motive entirely.
It does. And third, and perhaps most critically, there were no defensive wounds anywhere on her body.
Let's break down the mechanics of what the absence of defensive wounds actually means, because it's vital.
Okay, yeah.
In a typical knife attack, human instinct is immediate and autonomous. The victim will raise their arms to protect their face, their neck, their chest.
It's an automatic reflex.
Exactly. It results in deep lacerations to the palms, the forearms, and the fingers. It is a reflex that happens in milliseconds. You don't even think about it.
So they have none of those.
The total absence of these wounds on Kristen means one of three things happened. First, she was completely immobilized by mechanical restraint.
Like rope or zip ties.
Right. Second, she was restrained by the physical weight of multiple attackers pinning her limbs. Or third, she was the victim of a blitz attack.
And a blitz attack is a specific forensic term. It means there was no chase, no prolonged struggle.
Exactly, Ryan. A blitz attack means the perpetrator strikes with such sudden, overwhelming, and catastrophic force, often from behind or from a blind spot, that the victim's central nervous system does not even have the required milliseconds to send a signal to the arms to block the weapon.
She was incapacitated instantly.
Instantly. When you combine this lack of defensive wounds with the sheer brutality of the overkill multiple stab wounds and a slashed throat, without the presence of a sexual motive, it points to profound, personalized rage.
It's not a robbery gone wrong.
No, it is not the signature of a passing thief.
And that forensic reality completely dismantles the working theory held by the New York State Police for decades.
Their official stance.
Right. They have publicly insisted that this was a, quote, crime of opportunity. They suggest a random transient passing through Ovid happened to see her on the road, decided to kill her, and simply moved on.
It doesn't fit the facts.
It doesn't. Random passersby do not generally drag a victim into a dense cornfield to inflict massive overkill without a secondary motive like robbery or sexual assault.
The physical evidence flatly contradicts the transient theory. I mean, a crime of opportunity is driven by immediate gratification, usually sexual violence or financial gain.
And we know she had no purse.
So robbery is out. We know there was no sexual assault. Furthermore, transient killers rarely spend the time required to drag a body into a field and completely undress the victim unless they are attempting to systematically destroy forensic links to themselves.
Which implies a level of forethought.
It implies organization and local comfort. That contradicts the profile of a random, panicking drifter. The brutality suggests she was overpowered quickly, violently, and purposefully.
And the immediate aftermath of the discovery in 1985 was chaotic. Law enforcement flooded the small community. Over the ensuing months and years, they generated those 1,900 leads.
A massive amount of paperwork.
But all of that manpower resulted in 0 arrests. And the murder weapon, which would have been drenched in biological evidence given the nature of the wounds, was never recovered.
Never found. This is where the systemic failures begin to compound, Ryan. You have a deeply insular town where everyone knows everyone.
People talk.
They do. Rumors immediately began to circulate regarding who was present on that road, who owned the stopped vehicle, and who the community was quietly protecting.
And the witnesses.
Witnesses provided conflicting statements. And beneath the rumors, the physical evidence collected at the scene, her clothing, fibers from the cornfield, biological swabs, it was all just boxed up.
Sitting on a shelf.
While we can attribute the investigative failures of 1985 to the technological limitations of the era, the tragedy of this case today is the active, seemingly deliberate refusal to utilize 21st century science.
Let's explain the mechanisms of this bureaucratic stonewalling, because it is staggering.
It really is.
We are not talking about a lack of evidence. The state of New York is currently in possession of over 300 individual pieces of physical evidence related to Kristen's murder. But they refuse to test it using modern methods.
They keep saying no.
In 2009, a highly respected team of touch DNA experts from the Netherlands offered to test the material.
And the state denied the request.
Just flatly denied it.
To understand why that denial is so frustrating, we have to explain how touch DNA works.
Right, because it's very different from 1985.
Night and day. In 1985, forensic serology required a stain of blood or fluid roughly the size of a dime just to determine basic blood typing.
A huge sample, relatively speaking.
Yes. Today, touch DNA focuses on epithelial cells. Humans shed tens of thousands of microscopic skin cells every minute.
You leave them on everything you touch.
Everything. When a perpetrator forcefully grabs a victim or handles their clothing while removing it, they leave behind trace amounts of those cells embedded in the fabric weaves.
Even after all these years?
Yes. Using modern MVAC systems, which essentially act as sterile, high-powered forensic vacuums, technicians can extract those microscopic cells from deep within the fibers of 40-year-old evidence.
Wow.
And then they amplify them using polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, to build a complete genetic profile.
So the Dutch team offers this revolutionary technique in 2009, and the state says no.
Denied.
Then, 3 years later, in 2012, a certified DNA laboratory right there in New York offered to take on the evidence.
A local lab.
Right. Again, the request was flatly denied by the authorities.
And the resistance continues today, Ryan. As recently as 2025, an advanced forensic laboratory in Texas offered to conduct comprehensive DNA testing.
Utilizing modern forensic genealogy.
Yes, to trace any unknown profile through public genetic databases. They offered to do this entirely for free.
Free of charge.
The financial burden on the state would be zero. Yet, as of this investigation, that request remains trapped in administrative limbo, pending approval that never seems to come.
It's like owning the exact key to a padlock, but the state refuses to let you insert it into the door because they're afraid of what's inside the room.
It makes no sense.
I have to pose this question to anyone listening. Why would an investigative agency repeatedly block free, state-of-the-art DNA testing on a cold case unless they are terrified of what the results might overturn?
From a purely scientific and investigative standpoint, there is no logical justification for the denial. The technology is proven. The evidence is secured. The only rational conclusion an outside observer can draw is that institutional pride, or a deep-seated fear of exposing a massively flawed initial investigation.
Or worse.
Or worse, exposing the identity of someone protected by that initial investigation is taking precedence over the pursuit of the truth.
So let's systematically evaluate the 4 main theories that have defined this investigation, relying strictly on the mechanics of the evidence.
Let's go through them.
The first theory, the local cover-up. This is the prevailing belief within the Ovid community itself. Many residents believe that local individuals know exactly who committed the murder, and the town is actively protecting them.
And the circumstantial evidence strongly bolsters this theory, Ryan. We have a murder weapon that simply vanished in a rural farming community.
Like you said, knives do not evaporate.
No. In a town of that size, disposing of a bloody weapon without someone noticing is incredibly difficult unless the community or specific members of law enforcement are choosing not to look for it. Combine that with the witnesses who suddenly provided conflicting stories and the unidentified local vehicle on the road. It paints a picture of collective silence.
The second theory is the official stance we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
The crime of opportunity by a transient.
The drifter theory.
Yeah. But as we established, the lack of sexual assault, the absence of robbery, and the extreme personalized overkill severely undermines the psychological profile of a random drifter.
Exactly. Which leads to the third theory, multiple attackers.
This one is chilling.
It aligns terrifyingly well with both the witness sightings and the autopsy findings. We have reports of two unidentified men walking behind Kristen,
Right.
and we have the complete lack of defensive wounds. While a blitz attack by a single, highly capable individual is possible, it is incredibly difficult for one person to inflict sustained, multiple stab wounds on a conscious 20-year-old without her fighting back.
She would have struggled.
She would have. However, if two attackers were present, one to completely restrain her arms and immobilize her, and the other to inflict the fatal wounds, the lack of defensive injuries is perfectly explained.
And the fourth and final theory. Someone she knew. This theory bridges the gap between her behavioral shift and the physical evidence.
It is perhaps the most logically sound theory when you look at the timeline.
Because of the payphone call.
Yes. Her sudden, unexplained desire to flee Ovid and her use of a public payphone indicates a severe conflict with someone in her immediate circle.
Right, she was trying to get away from someone specific.
Furthermore, leaving the trailer at 11:30 p.m. without her shoes or purse strongly suggests she either fled the trailer in absolute terror or she stepped outside expecting to speak to someone right by the door, someone she recognized, and was unexpectedly ambushed and taken.
Both scenarios point directly to familiarity.
Both scenarios point directly to someone she was familiar with, someone who had access to that property.
The stonewalling by the state has not silenced the demand for answers, though. The pushback from the public is ongoing and relentless.
It really is inspiring.
Every year, supporters and advocates gather in Ovid. They physically walk the exact route Kristen took on that dark road to keep the pressure on the authorities.
And that mobilization has only grown more sophisticated. In 2025, social media campaigns successfully bridge the geographical divide,
Bringing people together.
connecting the community of Ovid directly with Kristen's hometown of Burnsville. Dozens of people coordinated simultaneous vigils in both states.
That's powerful.
They stood together, cutting through the geographical isolation, united by a singular, unyielding demand directed at the New York authorities. Test the DNA, all of it.
Kristen O'Connell was 20 years old. She had an entire life waiting for her back in Minnesota.
A bright future.
She had dreams, she had a family who loved her, and she had a future that was violently stolen in a dark field. Instead of being remembered for the life she lived, she has become one of New York State's most haunting, frustrating, unsolved mysteries.
40 years later, the physical reality of the crime remains trapped in cardboard boxes. The microscopic biological clues that could easily identify her killers wait in the dark.
Just sitting there.
The family waits in agonizing limbo, and the truth remains trapped behind a seemingly impenetrable wall of bureaucratic red tape.
I want you, the listener, to consider this as we close our investigation today. When over 300 pieces of physical evidence are perfectly preserved,
Untouched.
when modern laboratories are begging to test them at no cost to the taxpayer, but the state actively and repeatedly blocks that science, is the case truly unsolved because the evidence is lacking?
Or is it something else?
Or is it unsolved because the system is actively choosing not to look? Who exactly benefits from the continued silence in Ovid?
It's a question that demands an answer.
We want to hear from you. If you have insights, questions, or theories grounded in the facts, reach out. Your voice helps keep these stories alive.
And if you want to hear more episodes of The Dark Dive, consider following and subscribing. It helps us continue bringing these stories to life. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Dark Dive.